All right, today we're diving into something that's frankly pretty shocking. We're looking at the Netherlands, a country famous for its high standards, where the education system is facing a massive crisis that's been building for decades. So let's just start with this question right here. It gets straight to the point. And I know it might sound like an exaggeration, but the data behind it, well, it's seriously alarming. Here's the reality behind that question. 1 in 3, a staggering 1 in 3 15-year-olds in the Netherlands is now what you'd call functionally illiterate. That means they genuinely struggle to understand a newspaper, their own textbooks, or even complex instructions. And let's be really clear here, this isn't about any one group of students. This reflects a failure of the education system itself. So how on earth did we get here? I mean, this didn't just happen overnight. Let's actually trace the timeline of this shocking educational decline. This timeline really shows you how fast this has happened. Back in 2000, the number was 1 in 10, which was already a big concern. But then, by 2019, that number had skyrocketed to 1 in 4. And just a few years later, by 2022, a shocking 1 in 3. This isn't some slow, gentle decline. This is a system in freefall. And you know, the experts are not mincing words. Ad Verbrugge, he's the chairman of the Better Education Netherlands Association, calls the situation downright bad and very worrying. And he lays the blame directly on years and years of failed policy. So you have to ask, why? How did this happen? Well, it wasn't caused by just one bad policy. It's more like this tangled web of interconnected issues that have just been eating away at the system from the inside. So what does that tangled web actually look like? Well, experts are pointing to a whole host of factors. You've got flawed teaching methods that are replacing techniques we know work. There's a serious loss of authority and discipline in the classroom. Teacher training is seen as totally inadequate. Kids are just being passed along to the next grade without actually meeting the standards. And on top of all that, teachers are facing parents who are incredibly demanding and sometimes even violent. One of the key failures is abandoning methods that we know work, like explicit direct instruction. It's a really simple, proven I do, we do, you do approach. The teacher shows how it's done, the class practices it all together, and then students work on their own to really master the skill. But these fundamentals? They've often been thrown out for less effective educational fads. Now, whenever a public service like education starts failing, what's the first thing you hear? It's underfunded, right? But in the Netherlands, that assumption could not be more wrong. The numbers tell a completely different story. It's the classic political reaction, isn't it? There's a problem, so let's just throw a pile of money at it. You hear calls for more funding all the time. But in this case, the data just doesn't back that up at all. The numbers here are just staggering. In the year 2000, the education budget was 21 billion euros. Today, it is 55 billion. And even when you adjust for inflation, that's a 54% real terms increase. So let's be really clear. A lack of money is not the problem here. So where's it all going? And this is the paradox at the very heart of the crisis. The system has way more resources than it ever has, but the results have absolutely tanked. Just think about this. There are 180,000 fewer students to teach, but there are 70,000 more people working in the sector than there were in 2010. So we have fewer students, more money, and more staff for dramatically worse results. It's baffling. Which leads us to the really obvious question. If you have fewer students and teacher salaries have gotten better, where is all of that extra money actually going? Well, a huge chunk of it is flowing into this booming industry of external services. There are now over 61,000 consultants and 40,000 private tutoring companies that are basically feeding off the education budget. This has created a kind of shadow education system. It's draining public funds away from the classroom, and it's making inequality worse, because only the parents who can afford it can buy the extra help that the schools themselves are failing to provide. This brings us to the real structural flaw, right at the very heart of the system. The problem isn't just about waste. It's that the way schools are funded actively encourages them to lower their standards. And here it is, the core of the problem. The entire funding model is based on quantity, not quality. Schools get paid for every student they enroll and for every student they pass. The quality of the education? It's just not part of the financial equation. This creates what you'd call a perverse incentive. Just push students through the system, whether they've learned anything or not, because that's how you get paid. So what's the result? The bar just gets lower and lower and lower. Schools stop guarding academic standards because their finances depend on hitting efficiency targets, which is just a fancy way of saying passing students. So kids who are functionally illiterate are pushed on to the next level, which creates this domino effect that leads directly back to the crisis we started with. It's a really bleak picture, I know, but it's not hopeless. Experts have actually laid out a pretty clear path to reverse this decline, and it's not about more money. It's about a fundamental change in mentality and structure. The expert Ad Verbrugge offers this really powerful analogy. Look at Dutch football. It's world class, right? That's because it's driven by passion, a huge pride in homegrown talent, and just a relentless focus on excellence. That is the mentality that has been lost in education, where boring process has replaced passion. The focus has to shift back from quantity to quality. So the recovery plan boils down to 4 concrete steps. First, reform the funding system to reward quality. Second, guarantee teacher quality by making sure proven methods are part of their training. Third, bring back subject matter experts and deep knowledge, not just vague, fuzzy skills. And fourth, you've got to strengthen government inspection to actually enforce these new standards. At the end of the day, this is all about accountability. The Dutch Constitution guarantees quality education. So when the government fails to deliver on that promise, it's not just a policy failure. It is a misuse of public money and a violation of a fundamental duty. And that's what we end with. This crisis isn't just about test scores. It's about the future of a whole society. A generation that can't read properly is a generation that will be frustrated, disengaged, and unable to fully participate in democracy. The true cost isn't measured in euros. It's measured in the long-term social, cultural, and economic health of the nation. So what happens when a country stops valuing its own future?